This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. StoryBeat episodes are widely available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and numerous other podcast apps and platforms. So please take a moment to subscribe to StoryBeat wherever you listen to podcasts. My guest today, Ron Diamond, has had two primary producing, distributing, and curating careers. The first, mostly in live filmmaking, ranged from 1980 to 1990, and the second in animation film production began in 1990 and has lasted through today. In 1990, Ron founded the commercial animation production company Acme Filmworks, Inc., and has continually represented and works with artist-animators from around the globe, producing seminal, global, national, and regional ad campaigns for such entities as Levi's Jeans for Women, United Airlines, Hilton Hotels, Microsoft, Charmin, Principal Financial Services Group, and hundreds of other clients. He also produced logos and main title sequences, including the logos for Scott-Free Productions, Universal Pictures' Robin Hood, and Disney's The Wonderful Ice Cream Suit, among many others. In 1995, Ron produced the animated feature for PBS's American Playhouse, Drawn from Memory. And in 2003, Ron produced the Academy Award-nominated short film, Nibbles. He also executive produced Drew Carey's Green Screen Show. Ron has lectured at leading animation schools and has served as a juror and guest speaker at numerous film events and festivals. In 1995, Ron partnered with Dan Sarto to create and run Animation World Network, which can be found at awn.com. AWN would become the largest animation-related publishing group on the internet, providing readers from over 151 countries with a wide range of interesting, relevant, and helpful information pertaining to all aspects of animation. In 1999, Ron presented the first animation show of shows with the aim of screening the most original, funny, intelligent, and creatively charged animated short films from around the world. Ron seeks out the very best new animated shorts in search of artist-directors to work with who are exploring and pushing new creative boundaries in animation. So for me, someone who has been a part of the animation industry for 30 years, it's a truly great honor to have the dynamic Ron Diamond as my guest on StoryBeat today. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Well, it's my pleasure, believe me. All right, so where did your love of animation come from? Where did all this start? How did you get into cartoons and animation?
Well, I grew up like many people in the 1960s watching cartoons on television, Warner Brothers and other short films, going to see the various Disney movies as they came out, including films like Mary Poppins. And they all had a pretty profound effect on me. I was very media interested. It was a big part of my youth and loved watching commercials, actually. And
so you were fascinated by commercials even as a kid?
Yeah, I was a little bit like that character in the Jerry Lewis movie. I can't remember which one. That was I wasn't consuming all the products that were on the different TV commercials, but you know, I really found them to be a very compelling medium of communication. I just thought, wow, you can tell a whole story in 30 seconds or a minute at the time. And
it is an amazing thing that you can tell that whole story in such a short period. Beginning, middle, and end. You can get the character and everything
in 720 frames. It's incredible. And so, yeah. As a matter of fact, I remember. Forgive me for launching into a story about a commercial. I remember this vividly. I mean, of course, I remember the Alka-Seltzer commercial with that R.O. Bleckman did, which may have been the late 60s, early 70s, about the guy. It's kind of like a David Frost kind of conversation with the guy and his stomach, and they're like having an argument about what he's eating.
Right.
And the stomach is, very upset with him for, putting certain foods in him. Beautiful, very funny, witty piece. Love that. But I also remember, it may have been, one of the large oil companies had a commercial where, an attendant shows up and this young guy and a young woman are, going out on a high school date, and he's, you gotta buy some gas, and he says, to the attendant, he says, I'll take 25 cents worth of gas. And the man says, yes, sir. And so he goes around, he puts the gas in the tank, and he checks the oil, and he checks the water, and and the young woman is, wow, you're really important. I mean, they must really know you here. You're and he's like feeling really confident with himself, and really pleased with the service he's getting. And the attendant comes back and he hands him the quarter, and he says, is there anything else I can do for you, sir? And he says, I'll take another 25 cents worth. And it was like, yes, sir, and all in 30 seconds. And it's just, those kinds of charming commercials, I think are very, very funny.
And what kind of cartoons did you watch as a kid? Did you watch TV stuff?
I mean, yeah, not so much TV stuff. Yeah, I mean, of course I watched this, the Flintstones when it was on primetime television. But it wasn't until about 1973 or 74 that PBS LA, came out with, KCET came out with a animation festival program with Jean Marsh. And she hosted the show, and they had all the weirdest animations on. I mean, weirdest in that we had never seen anything like it before. And I quite vividly remember seeing the film Hot Stuff, and I'm going to butcher the kind man's name, Zlatko Grigic, which I know is wrong. It's horribly wrong. But,
He'll forgive you. He'll forgive you.
And it's about caveman, being faced with, this horrible cold and, cold weather, and God gives them fire, and, they're introduced to fire, and it just brings on all sorts of wonderful opportunities. But of course, as luck would have it, man would burn down the world. And at the very end, God goes, next time I'll give it to women.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be a good idea, because men have screwed it up pretty badly along the way.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, that's a whole different subject. But yes.
So did you go to school for filmmaking and animation?
Well, I was uncertain about what to do in college. So I went to community college for a couple of years, and I took a film class. And when I was the filmmaking class, Super 8 filmmaking, and we watched a lot of movies. We'd watch one or two movies by a director and talk about it and write papers on it. And I loved that. And so during the year between my freshman and sophomore year, I went to the theater the whole summer. I saw double bills every night,
right,
at various repertory theaters. And that really launched me to want to go to UCLA Film School. And thankfully I got in, because I only applied to two film schools. San Francisco didn't need me at the time, and UCLA welcomed me. And it was, I knew when I got my invitation to go there that it would change my life.
Sure. Well, did you study animation at UCLA or just?
Yes. Oh, well, that's a funny question. I recently was honored with the UCLA Animation Workshop Crystal Anvil Award, which is an honorary award. June Foray and Andreas Deja and David Silverman, who's a dear friend, all received this award. And I took one class in the film department, in the animation department, which I really enjoyed and made a lot of friends, became very close with the faculty. The head of the department, Dan McLaughlin, who came to the award, when I received this honor, he was still, it was a few years, just shortly before he passed on, but he was kind enough to come and attend that. And but I learned a lot about the history of animation, and that really opened my eyes. And when I was in film school, my wife and I, we weren't married yet, but we started a little distribution company called Max Media, and started distributing animated shorts and live action shorts. And so we built a library of about 150 films.
Well, I'm curious, we'll get into this a little more in detail later, but the world of shorts is not notorious for being a big money maker.
Oh, no. It's funny going to a film school where they were very fond to drill into you any possible time they could. They said, it's show business. It's not show art.
Yep, for sure.
You remember that mantra, and but what I discovered in short films, and especially in animation, because you have so much more control over what you're telling in the animated form, is that it's kind of akin to poetry, that each piece is an extension of the individual and kind of speaks from their heart. And whether it's funny or sad or whatever it is, it's an extension of them. There's something very personal in the narrative, and when it's done by somebody who's really talented, it can be a very moving experience.
Well, especially in the world of shorts and animation, certainly when you get into features and it becomes very commercial, and you get your Pixar and Disney and so on, it's super commercial.
Yeah, and we also have our Richard Linklaters and Bill Plimptons and people like that who are making independent animated feature films. And in Europe, there's a very strong business in making animated feature films that are less commercial. I'm sure they would like to make Pixar level films. They don't have the infrastructure for it, the commitment.
So way back when, who were your producing heroes? Who were the artists and producers who you admired and thought, wow, I'd really like to be like them?
Well, way back when, I wasn't thinking about animation as a producer, and that's why I went for 10 years
in live action.
Doing live action before I decided, after a lot of influence of animation in my life, I decided that I really preferred the experience of producing and being involved in animation and wanted to pursue that professionally. Contemporary, Steven Spielberg, of course, and Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola. They were all, Stanley Kubrick, were all seminal people who stood out to me. Buster Keaton, and going way back, Buster Keaton was a big influence.
Well, Keaton was a one-man cartoon.
Oh, he was. Anybody who doesn't know Keaton really is denying themselves one of the greatest gifts they could ever imagine.
Absolutely. Still maybe one of, if not the greatest filmmakers who's ever lived.
Absolutely. Unquestionably.
And doing his own stunts and putting himself in harm's way on a regular basis. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Though it's interesting when you realize that he actually was very cautious. He broke his neck, but in the general, but, and when the house falls on him, that was all really well figured out to make sure.
Certainly. He wasn't a fool by no stretch of the imagination, but he did take big risks.
Yes, he did.
And some of the stuff he did, you would never allow a star to do today, unless you're Tom Cruise.
Harold Lloyd, I think, put himself at greater risk
definitely
than Buster Keaton did. Keaton approached it as an engineer. Literally as a structural engineer. He saw every gag that he was going to do. He played it completely out. He figured out exactly what he was doing. He was a master.
And the key to everything he did, I think, was that great stone face of his, where it was like not a terrifying thing. It wasn't a big deal. He wasn't making a joke out of it. It was just straightforward. This is the way it is.
Absolutely. He never pandered to the audience, which is great. He never mugged. Never. All of his peers mugged to the camera. And he would look at the camera, he would look at the audience, but he would never seek any kind of affirmation from them.
I love that. I love that when it's just coming naturally out of the character rather than it being forced.
Yes, and you could see bits of what he did in Our Hospitality and some of the work that Woody Allen did. You know, I mean, you can see how modern comedians applied their art. You know, so going back to the 60s and 70s, I mean, I was a huge fan of Mel Brooks and Woody Allen and anything that was funny. You know, truly funny. You know, sure, I watched the Evel Knievel movie as a kid, but in film school, yeah, I saw how all the great filmmakers, Frank Capra, and just so many
Howard Hawks.
and
Absolutely.
just so many great filmmakers. And there, when we'd take a class, we'd watch all of the films that director had ever done. So, you know, I didn't have time to take the Hitchcock class, but I audited it, and I was able to watch all the Hitchcock films, everything that he'd ever done, things that otherwise would be very, very hard to find. And we saw them chronologically. So you see the development of an artist and how they become who they are. And we had a great pleasure to invite Albert Whitlock, Hitchcock's matte painter, to UCLA to speak and present his reel of visual effects reel. And I remember bringing him onto the soundstage too at UCLA, and he said, "We shot Strangers on a Train in a stage smaller than this."
Wow,
like,
really?
"Oh my God, you shot Strangers on a Train," you know?
Well, perhaps there was no single director who pushed the art of the cinema harder than Hitchcock. To me, he's the greatest director who's ever lived. And there are several up there with him, but he pushed it forward when no one else had figured it out. And I think that is his great legacy.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So did you learn how to produce in school, or did you learn it really by doing it?
Both. I had an internship through the TV Academy, a producing internship where I worked on a TV series. A TV movie, and it was so invaluable. Actually, Chris Morgan, who was the producer of that, Harry Morgan's son, and I still remain in contact.
We should explain to the listeners who Harry Morgan was. He was a great actor who was around for many, many different movies and TV shows, famously Dragnet and MASH and various other shows. But we're talking about that Harry Morgan.
Absolutely,
yeah?
Absolutely. And Marvin Minoff, who was a terrific producer, and Bonnie Franklin, who was the star playing Margaret Sanger in this piece with David Dukes. Marvin and Bonnie fell in love during that, and they ended up living the rest of their lives together. And you know, it was a very interesting experience. I knew I wanted to produce. I liked the idea of coming in at the very beginning of the process and following it all the way through to the very end.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned how they worked with every crew member. So, you know, they gave me certain responsibilities. It wasn't a terribly long internship, maybe 6 weeks, if I recall, maybe longer. I don't remember exactly. But they were so welcoming me. They invited me to have lunch with them every day and to be with them every day and to go on location scouts, and get that kind of experience was invaluable.
So they were like mentors to you then.
Yeah. I mean, I learned so much from the first assistant director and the second assistant director, and you know, everybody, the location manager. I would hang out with them on the weekends. I would try to learn everything I possibly could, just so I would understand what their responsibilities were and what their challenges were.
All right, so let's talk about animation for a bit here,
Sure.
Because that's the main focus of the last 30 years of your life, basically.
Yeah. I mean,
all right, so all right, I'm going to ask you a really broad question, and I don't mean it to be as broad as I'm asking. When you are coming up with a new product, a new project, a new story, whatever that is, for you, where does it begin? Does it begin with story? Does it begin with visuals? Where do you start the process?
Well,
character?
I believe it always starts with a story, but the characters have to be as compelling as the story.
Mm-hmm.
The medium is more about what's right: a pencil, a pen, a crayon. What do you need to make it right for that narrative? So it's kind of like, would you shoot black and white or color? Well, I mean, there's certain movies you'd shoot in black and white, you know, and certain you'd shoot in very saturated color, and you'd You choose your medium to fit the narrative. And so the narrative is most important. But of course, a great story is only made great with terrific characters that you either love or hate, and that you can follow their arc so that it's a fulfilling experience.
Well, because we all know that audiences, generally speaking, and not in 100% of the cases, but in most of the cases, they're really only interested in characters in conflict with other characters in some way. And otherwise, and a lot of the animation, we'll get into the animation show of shows, a lot of the animation that's in the animation show of shows is not that at all. It's more art driven and less narrative driven. And some are.
We can have a conversation about that.
Well, I would love to have that conversation because I think it's important for us to understand how it works.
Sure.
But generally speaking, in narrative structured filmmaking, whether it's animation or live action, it's usually we're interested in people. We tend not to be interested in rocks and mailboxes. We tend to be interested in people or characters. So yes, the character is as important as anything.
Unless it's going to be an experimental film.
Right, exactly.
So when you look at a film like the work by Guy Madden, you go, well, okay, I'm going to accept the universe he creates.
Sure. Or some Bill Clinton,
Yeah. I mean, that's Bill's universe, as Guy's universe is his, and the Quay brothers' universe is theirs, Jan Schwenkmeyer's is theirs. There you have a range of different universes, but we accept that for what it is. And I incorporate experimental filmmaking in the show of shows on a smaller level because I know that, people generally aren't accustomed to that. And they need introduction to it.
Sure. And I think that it's important because you're not offering one piece, you're offering many pieces. And so to have it be a part of a show really does expand the audience's understanding of what animation can do.
Right. And, by way of example, I mean, we have this film Unsatisfying in the show, and it has 15 gags that plays off in 77 seconds.
Wow. And
that's in the 19th show. And, I think it's incredibly philosophical, and 77 seconds. I mean, that's 1 minute and 17 seconds of which at least 15 of those 17 seconds are credits. And the filmmakers chose Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings to counter, this, and the music. I mean, it's the saddest music in the world. I mean, if you're looking for, it's kind of like if you needed to get rid of something out of your system, you'd take Ipecac and you'd vomit. If you needed to cry, you would listen to Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, and you could not help but cry.
And that's been it's been in many movies, that piece.
Oh God, it's such a seminal classic, and there's only one recording that is the one recording everybody identifies with the piece, and that's the one they used. And what do they contrast that with? But a series of moments that have no people in them, but we know that the person is present because they were observing it. It's like we're the observer, but it's also, it happened because something. And each of the gags are things that happened wrong. Mm-hmm. So when a sandwich falls business side down on the floor, you go, ugh. We can all relate to that. Or when you shoot, when you're putting in a miniature golf course, and you just, your golf ball just misses that hole. I mean, it actually hugs the curve and then goes off into the wrong direction. We can all identify with the frustration of it. And then you put this music that kings and are buried to, at funeral processions, yes, against these absurdly insignificant but annoying little things. It's the perfect juxtaposition. So it's like, why do we have road rage? I mean, it's kind of like, we should just relax a little bit, it just kind of, by having that huge gap, there's no people in there. Like I want people, but right. But the story is there. But
the people are inferred.
They are inferred because they're taking some action or they're observing what's happening.
Sure. Okay, so now do you consider yourself a director as well, or are you just mostly in production? You're a producer?
I'm a creative producer.
Creative producer. All right. So then what is the most important thing that a creative producer should do to support their director and the people that work on production? What would you say are the important things that a producer must do?
I think the most important thing is to listen to what it is that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
Because any good project, any project that is committed to getting made, anything that has purpose has a voice unto itself. And we need to make sure that we put in everything that's necessary to get that, and listen to it, even if it's painful, even if it's not what you necessarily want to do.
Of course.
And I'm not talking about compromising one's integrity. If anything, it's about recognizing that we have to kind of hear what the message is. Now, you see, my peers in Hollywood are making movies and TV shows for the most part. I'm spending most of my time making commercials.
Right.
And so when a client comes to me, we need to listen to them. And we often say, what are the sacred cows on this project? What are we not allowed to kill? Okay. Or what is the most important thing for you? And it's really, it comes up almost on every single production, unless they just go, here's carte blanche, but that doesn't happen very often. But for us to understand what is important to the client in terms of the message, the idea, what the takeaway is, what the call to action is, and what visuals that they need to remember, usually the client has really just 2 or 3 things that they need to convey. When we know what those essential things are, then if we agree to those, I mean, if we accept those from the client or the agency, then we can have some creative latitude to make creative suggestions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We don't forget what they need.
There's a similarity between what you just described and what most writers on television series go through. You're not there to literally just put whatever you feel like on it. You are serving some other thing. What I like to call, when I teach my students, I like to call it the sandbox. On a TV series, there's a sandbox, and you can play within the 4 walls of that sandbox, but you can't go outside that sandbox.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about. You go and find out from the client, where are the parameters on this thing and how far can you stretch it? And then I assume sometimes you push that envelope a little bit.
Oh yeah, we've had commercials that were called all type and had no type in them. You know, I mean, just as an example, because when they looked at the work that I presented to them, they had a script and they had a preconceived notion of what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But when they looked at the work of a director and they went, we want that director. We like what that director has done creatively. And when they see what that director's done, and they go, well, the type doesn't need to appear, but we can have other things that are going to enhance the work. And that was an interesting commercial with, some famous, McCoy, what's his name? McCord? I can't remember. A major Western actor. And we were using stock footage. And we were drawing lines around, kind of lines as if it was part of their world, but they couldn't really see it, and emphasizing things that were happening. And it was a huge success all around. They were very, very happy with it. The clients were ecstatic with the whole idea, but it had nothing to do with what they originally came to us for.
I'm curious. You're making a lot of product that is going to last a very short period of time on purpose. And it might get archived and somebody may actually show it in an archival setting at some point. But generally speaking, it's designed to have a short shelf life. Am I correct?
For the most part, yes.
Yes.
I mean, not in my world. I still look back at work. I mean, I'm looking at artwork right now.
But I'm talking about the general public. The general public is not going to see your work that long.
But it's interesting. We did some United Airlines commercials in 2004. We produced them in 2003 for 2004. And the first one, that we did 3 out of 4 of the first launch of the campaign with the artist directors. And they got their voiceover artist because he said that he really liked the animation. And it was the first time Robert Redford ever lent his voice to a commercial.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, he got paid very handsomely from what I understand, but
no doubt.
But I think that integrity is important. And I think that these commercials can resonate, just as the two that I told you about earlier, are part of my memory. I think about them. I think about, the Alka-Seltzer and this, getting gas commercial, whether the details of it are important. I think that commercials actually are part of our fabric of society.
No question.
They stick with us for a long time.
Oh,
And
I think I think the key is for you correct me if I'm wrong, but the key for a commercial filmmaker is to make a commercial that has longevity in memory, that sticks to you.
It's interesting. We've produced commercials that did not sell the product, and we've produced commercials that have really sold the product.
Mm-hmm.
The United Airlines commercials were hugely successful. The reason that the ones that didn't sell the product was sometimes we listened too much to what the creatives were telling us from the agency, and they were like filling it with stuff and trying to put too much in. Whereas we're trying to take stuff out. We're trying to work with, like, the work of Picasso at the end of his life was, just a few lines on drawings. But if you looked at Picasso in the 30s, you'd realize that he was, very detailed in what he was doing, very different kind of stylistic concern. So we're trying to reduce the amount of work, so not for production need, but to communicate the message.
Sure.
Sell the product as successfully as possible.
There are commercials out there today that I see on TV, and they make me completely nuts, because I will have seen that commercial repeated over and over and over again, and I cannot tell you what the product is. I have no idea what the product is, but I can tell you there was a commercial, but I don't know what it was about. And then I have to actually concentrate well down the road to go, what is this about? Because it has nothing to do with the product.
And we did the Charmin bear commercial. We introduced the bear into the market. We actually made a going away card for Mr. Whipple. I can't remember the actor's name, who would always talk about not squeezing the Charmin. But of course, it was such a great concept, because, especially for a 1960s, 70s scenario about somebody who was, extolling the virtues of doing one thing, but then not doing it, and then doing it himself, which was, very, very interesting kind of psychological thing. But we're the ones who introduced the very first Charmin bear commercials for 13 years.
Wow.
And
you're the earlier commercials you're talking about is please don't squeeze the Charmin.
No, we did all the animated commercials that were introduced in around 1988 or 89. I can't remember the exact year. And no, not that early.
I was talking about the earlier commercials before the bears. Was please don't.
No, we didn't do the bear. We only did the bear commercials.
Right.
Only animated commercials that I think Charmin ever did prior to. As I say, Mr. Whipple left the scene, and we came in with the bear.
Gotcha.
We drew and created and developed, and listening to what a client needs and wants is so important. In terms.
Well, you're serving their needs, not yours, correct?
Well, hopefully we don't compromise our aesthetic in the process. And so one of the specialties of my company, Acme Filmworks, has always been to find the right artist to create whatever they want. And I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who was head of production or executive producer of Ridley Scott's RSA Productions, Scott Free had existed for a number of years, but not so many. And he contacted me and he said, we've looked at 150 animators for this logo we're trying to create, and we can't find what Ridley wants. Do you have anybody you got? And I said, yeah. So I sent over one reel, and that was who he hired.
Is that the one with the bird, and it's sort of sketchy looking?
It's from The Third Man, actually. It was the live footage was referenced from The Third Man, and
that never dawned on me before. Yeah. That's really
when
good.
You watch it again, you'll see that.
Oh yes, now I know it in my head immediately. But
he's an artist himself. Ridley is.
Sure. Well, he made commercials.
Right.
Tony Scott made commercials.
Right. So, they wanted something to put, he and Tony wanted something to put on all of their movies and TV shows. Mm-hmm. And unquestionably, they have been very loyal to keeping that logo. And it's something that we get called about on a regular basis because it's something different. If anybody goes to the website, we've actually just remastered a number of works by that same director. Well, that and then the Levi's piece that we did back in '93 with Gianluigi Toccofondo and Simona Milazzani. And we just did a 4K remaster on Levi's piece, and it looks gorgeous. We happen to have the camera negative, so we did that.
May I assume I can figure out where Acme came from?
Well, it is
not.
to loving, I was a big fan of the Roadrunner. I mean, I really, and all the, I mean, it was just, and I was a big fan of Chuck Jones. I had the pleasure to know him personally, to know his family, his daughter, and, heard him speak on several occasions and have his book Chuck 'Em Up and all that. And, I really like the fact that he said, in animation, the backgrounds are often just kind of tossed away, but if you make them interesting and artful, they can mean so much more with all the same animation that you normally put in front of it. And I think that he really, he had just such a marvelous sense of humor. And of course, as the story goes, he, like the rest of the animators, were given a prime office location looking out onto the loading dock, and they would see boxes of Acme stuff arriving from the Acme camera company, which was an animation camera, and it just had stenciled on an Acme, and they would joke about, well, where did that come from? So I have all sorts of Acme paraphernalia that I've collected over the years. So yeah, it's like Zenith and it's like Pinnacle, but for me, I like the use of Acme because it's the name that is sort of very American.
Oh, and it's even if people don't understand where or what it is, somehow it's in the zeitgeist. It's in their consciousness somewhere.
It is. It means the highest point.
Yeah, sure.
It's great.
But it's drilled in. If you are a Warner Brothers cartoon fan, Acme got drilled into your head.
And when people call here, I do tell them that we are the manufacturers of rocket-powered roller skates. And,
well, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the animation show of shows. How did you start that? Why did you start that? What was that all about?
Well, Acme had been started in 1990, and it was a great decade. It was a great decade of work, and I found the best way to find talent was to go to film festivals. So up until this year, when the festival was held virtually, I'd gone to every edition of the Annecy Festival. That would be 26 visits to the city or the town of Annecy.
Explain for the listeners what the Annecy Festival is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful town in the French Alps, about 30 miles outside of Geneva. It's a medieval town with a jail, a 16th century jail right in the center of town, with canals running through it. And it's really the place where people who love animation come for a week each year to meet. And it's insane the amount of programming that occurs. It is physically impossible to see everything that they play at Annecy. And I see between 16 and 20 programs in the course of a week.
Wow.
And that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of animation. And I focus on seeing short films and student films. And, I realized back in the 80s, I was producing something called the International Tourney of Animation. And it was a touring collection of animated shorts that played mostly in museums. And probably if you have any listeners who are probably 50 years old and older, maybe 40 years old and older, they might know of the International Tourney of Animation, which was actually started at LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and was run by a man named Prescott Wright. And he sold his business to a company called Expanded Entertainment. And I was hired by Expanded to come and produce for them and to post-produce their films because they knew I had a strong post-production experience. And so I helped curate the programs and produce the trailers and the, a lot of the assets and putting the shows together to make sure that they played well in 16 and 35 millimeter. And so it was a big production experience for getting those shows together. And we literally make 35 millimeter prints of those shows. And they were kind of like the animation shows. They were more geared toward a wider variety. So they would show commercials. So I remember one show we did had work by Richard Williams, and forgive me if I mix up different shows, because we also did something called the Animation Celebration and Outrageous Animation and Computer Animation. And so we were introducing important animation works onto the scene when theaters really were strong, and the partners have expanded were the owners of Landmark Theater Corporation.
Right.
And so they were able to put it in their own theaters, and we built a huge audience. These shows were generally earning between $2 and $3 million a piece.
Wow.
Which is a lot of money.
That's
a
huge.
lot of money, especially when ticket prices were something like $6 or $8.
And the show is shorts, right?
Of program of shorts, but because they basically had the venue, they could play the trailers as long as they want to attract people. And it was an art house circuit, so they would attract people who were interested in this kind of programming.
Sure. All right, so let's talk about how you put shows together.
Yeah, well, so I go to Annecy and I go to look for films, but I originally started going to Annecy to look for directors for Acme Filmworks to work with me.
You were looking for things for your own company, not just
looking for directors who had accomplished and defined themselves based on their aesthetic and their storytelling ability.
You were, I assume, looking for unique visions. Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
That would be that to me makes a lot of sense. You want to looking for breaking molds all the time.
This is all pre-internet, so
sure.
I knew information that a very small number of people knew, maybe a few thousand people. And to the extent that I knew it, probably only a few hundred people knew the amount of information that I knew in terms of watching all these films,
sure.
and where they were, where all the bodies were buried, so to speak, and how to find really great people and present them. And so I came out in '90 with Acme Filmworks, and Colossal Pictures was going at the time, and I worked on Liquid Television. And when we ended up getting the Levi's campaign, that ended the work. They said, we don't need you on Liquid Television anymore, because this was a TV show on MTV. I was doing all the acquisitions for that show. They felt like I was taking too much work away from them. So all that is what was the precursor to the show of shows, the experience of putting together programs, including one that I had done in 1985 when I was testing my own distribution company, whether the idea of putting together short films, live action animated, would work. In fact, we had UCLA alum Colin Higgins introducing the show.
Wow. It
was a real honor to have him do that. We filmed him on soundstage too as well. And so I having left in 1990 the international tourney of animation, which only went on for a few years after Prescott sold it, maybe 5 years or 6 years, I went to, having created Acme, I thought, there's got to be an audience for these short films, because nobody was seeing them anymore, and there still was no real internet to speak of. Even though the internet got started in the 90s, nobody was really tuned into it. You couldn't watch videos easily online.
Not for a long time.
Not for a long time. So I was looking for directors, and and then I thought, I've seen all these great films. I should call my friends at Disney. And I called Disney and I said, can I bring some shorts over at lunchtime? And they said, sure, if you want, And they had sack lunches for their employees. And so we sat in the theater, and, like a couple hundred people showed up to watch. And they showed the very first one, as did Pixar, as did DreamWorks, and a couple of other studios. ILM, I think, showed the very first program, and they've all shown it ever since.
Well, I'm sure it helps them to stimulate different thinking.
Well, I think so. You know, it's funny. Animation operates in a different universe than motion pictures do. Animation exists like the Hollywood studio era did in 1930.
Yeah.
Because when you had these mega corporations like 20th Century Fox, you know, they had their own laboratory, they had their own greensmen, they had their own actors, their own writers, their own directors. They had everything. They could do everything on the lot. They literally didn't have to go anywhere to make the movie. It was there, you know, and it was all under contract, and they even had their own movie theaters. Well, animation is actually, you know, we don't have our own movie theaters, but we basically produce animation the same way. Everything's done in-house. You know, yes, we have to hire outside actors, we have to hire some outside talent, but that's how the studios are. And at the time, they were all being run by people who had a great deal, and they still do, a great respect for the art form. And when a short film distinguishes itself, it's kind of like, wow, you know, they want to meet the new young talent. And I vividly remember in 2000, which was just the year after, with the second animation show of shows, I had Michael Duduk-DeWitt, who directed the Red Turtle, which was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. It was a European production, but funded, but it was also overseen by Studio Ghibli, and which is the company of Miyazaki. And it had no dialogue in it, and it was a very experimental, artful, beautiful, amazing film. And I remember taking Michael and his film Father and Daughter and the Oscar shorts over to Disney and showing them. And we had lunch with Glenn Keane. And I mean, Glenn was just beside himself. Now, Glenn Keane is the guy who directed The Gentleman, for lack of a better term. The director of Dear Basketball, which won the Academy Award, along which he co-directed.
Really fantastic, fantastic,
beautiful film. And Glenn is just like one of the most exquisite animation artists, storytellers you'd ever want to know. And he's just finished a movie for Netflix, and that's going to be out soon. And
wasn't his father Bill Keane from the Family Circus?
He's the son of Bill Keane. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, a gentle, kind man. Just I'm grateful to have had him in my home on several occasions, to have cooked for him and his family, and to consider him amongst one of my dear friends. And anyway, so here we are with one of the top figures at Disney, and Glenn is so excited about watching the film. He says, "I have to show you what we're doing." And all of a sudden, all the antennae go up in the room, you know, I mean, not really in the room, around the table, you know, all the producers are like, what's Glenn gonna do? And all of a sudden, you know, he grabs Michael's arm, Michael grabs my arm, and we're like running through Disney. Now, all of a sudden, we have gone well beyond into the deep heart of the Disney creative space.
Yeah.
We've not signed any non-disclosure agreements. I mean, Glenn is like breaking all the rules because he knows that the people around him are going to be inspired by what they hear.
Right.
And it's that kind of enthusiasm at a studio level. That's why I think I keep getting invited back, and why they support the show of shows. They support it financially, and most of them do. They support it with their time and with their encouragement of their staff to see it, because they're ideas that they wouldn't see otherwise.
Well, I think that's the key, is that it's pretty easy in those circumstances to get lost in the forest for the trees. And you need that outside stimulation, that external stuff, to really go, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And to kind of force new ideas out into the open, flush ideas out.
Eat something other than Soylent Green.
That's exactly right. So okay, so let's talk about the process for how do you decide, after you've seen all these shorts all over at Annecy and wherever else you see them, how do you then decide, okay, these 12, 15, 20 shorts are going into this year's show of shows? How do you make those decisions?
You know,
pure guts?
Yeah. I mean, I solicit some opinions, but I don't make them my mandate. I've gone against family members who felt that I was making big mistakes by including certain films, and no, I got great reaction to them. You know, I think that to me, my job is like the story that when I talk about what the job of a producer is listen to what you're doing, listen to the films, but I also have to pay attention to the audience. I'm not
Sure
going
you do.
I'm not going to placate to the audience, but I'm going to make sure that they get a balanced meal. I'm not going to just fill it with a bunch of experimental films. I'm not going to just have a bunch of bombastic comedies in there.
All right. So a big part of the job then is also the programming of the show. What goes before what follows what? How do you make those decisions? Is that also pure guts?
I think I've figured out that I need to start the show extremely strong. Sometimes the most important film is the first film in the show and the second film in the show. I need to gain the confidence of the audience because, you don't know where somebody's just come from, right? They could have been in an argument. They could have been asleep. They could have, God knows where they were before they're going to start watching this in a movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
They could be out on a date. They could be a kid. They could be a grandparent. They could be, any combination of you could ever think of. So I need to kind of welcome them into the show and make them feel comfortable.
Right.
I need them to go, oh, well, this is good. This is funny, or this is charming, or this is interesting. This is genuinely interesting. So I don't know if you saw the 18th show, but
I think I saw it.
that's the one that has the fellow making animated characters at the beginning, and he's talking about the idea of being kind of like a character actor. It's really great. It's really great. A little film. It's only 2.5 minutes long, but people look at it and go, "How does he do that?" Because he's using found objects to make the animation, like leaves and all sorts of different things. And the characters are not endearing, but they are so endearing because they are made with heart. And they have a purpose for a brief moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
And then he stops animating. And all of a sudden, each of the characters stop, each in their own time. And it's kind of like, well, that's philosophical. I mean, that's a little bit like life unto itself. We're here for a purpose, and then at some point we don't.
So all right, so you start your shows off with a bang, in a sense.
A bang.
You want to hook the audience, which is typical of really good storytelling. Is you need to hook the audience early to keep their attention. So then you proceed from there to do what? What is
Usually
your?
I'll give you the recipe entirely. The end of the show is also very strong. It's got to be an extremely powerful film.
You got to hook them in and leave them at the end going, wow, that was really fantastic.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. In the middle, I need like a tentpole. I need a tentpole film that makes them go, wow. So again, in the 18th show, we have the film Pearl, which was nominated for the Oscar and directed by Patrick Osborne, who made the film Feast, which won the Academy Award at Disney, and a beautiful animated short, completely different stylistic, but this was produced as a VR experience as part of Spotlight Stories at Google. And Pearl is in the show, and when people see it, they go, wow, this is a really beautiful relationship between a father and a child. Mm-hmm. And so I put a tentpole film usually somewhere around halfway to 3/5 of the way into the film. And usually I back end the film with very strong films, very, very strong. I want from that tentpole film out, they don't all have to be equally strong, but they all have to be pretty powerful.
Right.
And then I'll usually put more experimental films toward the front. In the 20th show, we had a film called Grand Cannon, which starts with live action of a fellow drawing a pencil.
Yes, I remember.
And it's filming him while he's drawing a pencil. And you can see how articulate he is about that drawing, the beautiful detail. And you could see the little brushes that he's using to paint tiny numbers, the detail on the edge of the pencil, the numbering and the lettering and all of that. And you kind of get a sense that this took a lot of work.
Uh-huh.
and then it clicks to another pencil, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And all of a sudden, we're seeing a stop motion effect of all these different objects that are found. I asked Alain, the director who made the film, I said, well, where did all this come from? I mean, did you know, he said, these are objects that found their way into my home over time.
And there are thousands of them.
There's 5,000.
Oh my Lord.
It took him 10 years to paint this thing.
Oh my goodness.
And it's artistic, and the music is great, and it really complements it. And it's about consumption, because you see multiples of the same thing.
Sure.
And you see a lot of you know, really kind of heart there. But you realize these are things that we're throwing away. They're all things that we either use up. It's not food. It's not sustainable stuff. It's just part of life. So it could be a computer mouse. It could be a wrench. It could be pliers. It could be, you know, it could be all sorts of interesting things, but they're not, nothing there is natural. You don't see rocks. You don't see leaves. You don't see bird feathers. You don't see meat, you know, like you might see in a Jan Schwenkmeyer film. These are all objects that we have acquired, and it makes us think a little bit about how much stuff we really need, and are we being considerate about what we are using, and maybe there's a lot of stuff. And then we also think about what insane amount of work went into making this film.
And each of the images flies by in milliseconds.
There's 24 frames in a second. Some of them are on for 2 frames. I mean, it's really insane.
And each one of them is just beautifully rendered. Every frame is beautifully rendered.
God, I mean, with such, I mean, a pencil, okay, it's beautiful. It's got a symmetry to it and all of that, but wires? I mean, a mouse with its wires coiled up, you know, I mean, they're
all beautiful.
But it's gorgeous. Every drawing, I mean, they're all paintings. They're watercolor paintings that he does. And the audience it's just like a barrage of imagery going by so quickly. And you can't remember, I mean, you can remember a few images, but,
sure.
but you realize, oh my God, the kind of devotion that goes into making this kind of
film. I thought to myself, this must have taken a long time. In no way did I think 10 years, but it makes sense. It would be 10 years to draw all that stuff.
Yeah.
That is what you call obsessive compulsive.
No, it's what you call an animator. Animators, they have to do this kind of stuff. That's the thing. I have this feeling that, you know, the COVID crisis will pass and everybody will be out, and a few animators, like maybe 50 animators around the world, they'll take off their headphones, they'll come outside and go, what's going on? I mean, literally, they'll have just the entire thing.
It's like the soldiers that got lost in the islands after World War II, that they were there for years after the war was over.
Well, yeah, I think about this sculpture park in Norway where the sculptor made these incredible sculptures for like 40 or 50 years. And he missed World War I and World War II. I mean, literally, he missed them entirely. He was just busy working, and he kept getting paid. So, you know.
Keep working. Do you work on the shows all year round?
Yes, because we're a nonprofit and wholly underfunded. So, yes, anybody who wants to watch it can see it on Vimeo on demand. And can donate to the animation shows anytime you want. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm involved in every aspect of the distribution. So I work with artists, volunteers, and employees when I can afford them to do all the press kit materials. I hire a writer to do the press kit. To do publicity, I hire publicists when I can afford them. We have to make trailers and graphics and prepare them, keep the website going. We do a lot of stuff on Facebook in terms of messaging and Instagram, producing teasers for the different shows, trying to give people insight as to what they are, doing mailings and such. So really the most active time for the assembly of the show is usually from May until until August or September. Right now, I'm really behind schedule, but the reason that I try to get it out by September is because once the October, November rolls around, everybody's thinking about the Academy Awards. It's very hard to get into movie theaters. So right now, it's hard to get into movie theaters. The 21st show that I've produced has the 21st annual animation shows has been halted. I think we're going to play our first date in Vancouver in a couple of weeks or a week, which would be great. Vancouver.
You're not gonna be before an audience, are you?
It would be played before an audience. In Canada, they feel it's safe to do that. So
Wow.
I will not personally be flying up there to present it. I was scheduled to present it in Calgary. I had purchased my ticket to go to Calgary, and that was around March 13th. And finally, the better sense of me said, no, I'm not going to go. And they played it one time in the theater.
Well, so just for the audience, to understand that, because you may be watching or listening to this rather a very long time from when we're recording it, but we are recording it in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so talking about audiences and people going to theaters and watching shows is a big deal right now. 2-3 years from now may not be such a big deal, but it is at the moment. I am curious about one important thing. Do you obtain rights to these movies? How does the rights issue work for filmmakers?
The only way that this exists is with the financial support of the studios and of generous people. We generally get between $60,000 and $100,000 donated, and almost all of that goes to the filmmakers. We pay them guarantees against earnings generally, or we pay them a flat fee for their films, but they can go into the 5 figures to get the rights to the films to be able to play them.
Well, that's cool.
There's business. I mean, we are a nonprofit, but we still need to respect the artists.
Sure.
And there's no greater way to respect an artist than to say, we're going to put out all the money we think you're ever going to make up front. And that's the burden of the entertainment business, is acquiring those rights, because acquiring the rights to an animated short film is akin to try to steal somebody's baby from them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's much harder generally to negotiate the rights to a short film than it is to acquire the rights to a feature film.
Sure. Well, and I think it's really great respect that you show the artists by saying, hey, we're not going to be able to pay you a fortune, but we're going to pay you something.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we have a director who from Brazil made a wonderful 2-minute film called Business Meeting. It's in the 20th show as well. And it's a bunch of people who are kowtowing to their boss. And, you know, they say, what do you think? And it's like, I believe what so-and-so, I subscribe to whatever so-and-so said. And then it's so-and-so and so-and-so and so. It's like a circle. Everybody is accepting what the other person said. And it's just a lot of fast talk for not really making any kind of real statement of your own, which we're all familiar with, or many of us are quite familiar with. And so, but he lives in Brazil in a small town, and he got written up very generously by the New York Times.
Wow.
And then, you know, his mother has that newspaper, that copy of the New York Times hanging in her living room because she's proud of her son.
Sure.
And for that filmmaker, you know, I don't know if he's ever going to become an Academy Award filmmaker or what, but for him, that gave him a great deal of confidence and reassurance that if the New York Times likes my film, well, maybe it's actually, he literally says to me, you know, maybe it's not that bad. I said, no, it's a good film. That's why I put it in the show. Said, yeah, you know.
That's such a common thing about any art. And that is the people that create the art usually know where all the seams are and all the difficulties they had and how this could have been better if I did this and that. And you're not seeing what I threw away that could have worked and blah, blah, blah. And so the idea that artists are somewhat neurotic, writers are definitely neurotic, most of them, and that's the old cliche. But the idea is that artists don't treasure their work the way that other people viewing it treasure it. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
It becomes the viewer's ownership of it to a certain extent.
You know, it's like pencils down in class, you know, when you're doing a test. You know, the filmmaker never feels like they completely finished their film. They just have to turn it in at some point.
Oh, well, a friend of mine who was he has many patents, and one of his famous phrases is, there comes a time in the development of every product when you have to shoot the engineer, because
Right.
the engineer will just keep developing and developing and developing forever.
Just finessing it just a little bit. So of course artists see the flaws in everything that they're doing, things that they beat themselves up over, and they want to make it better, but they're not. And so it's good to have a deadline. And it's funny, in producing commercials, people go, "Oh, that's an artist filmmaker. Is it going to be easy?" I said, they're going to love this. They love nothing more than to be able to be put in a box. Look, you've got 720 frames, and this is the messages you've got to get across, and this is the art. And it's like, great, no problem. It's
That's where real creativity happens.
Yeah, I made this movie for American Playhouse that you mentioned earlier with Paul Fierlinger, and it's his autobiography. We even had the voice of Václav Havel and Milos Forman, not just doing their voices, but they did their own characters in the film. Václav Havel being the former president of the Czech Republic and a poet himself. And so we win this prize at the Ottawa International Animation Festival, and so Paul goes up and he says, "Look, I've been producing this little teeny super guy for Sesame Street, and I do commercials and other commission things, and I always people telling me what to do, how much time I've got, and all that, what my budget is, and here I make this film, and nobody reads the script, nobody tells me what I have to do, and I have all the time I need to make the film. I had 5 years to make my own film, and frankly, I had all the money I needed. And you know what? I have to say, it's really hard to work under these conditions."
Yeah, I would say so. Well, I've been talking right now to Ron Diamond for a little more than an hour, if you can believe that. And so last two questions for you. First is, in all of your experiences, do you have a story that you can share with us that's either weird, strange, quirky, offbeat, oddball, or perhaps just plain funny?
Well, I'll go back to my live action days. I have all sorts of things with advertising agencies, but I don't want to embarrass anybody terribly. But I had the chance to work with the legendary Roger Corman. Of course, he gave Ron Howard his shot, and Francis Ford Coppola, and James Cameron. Just
Jack Nicholson.
Oh, so many people got their first shot at directing and producing movies with him. And I produced a movie in 1985 called Sorority House Massacre. And he had a recent graduate from Stanford walking around University High School going, "What do you think?" Asking people the titles. "Do you think this would make a good movie?" He was a really young guy. He ended up working on Sorority House Massacre. And so anyway, we were drilled into us was, you will not make a movie, and every director who has ever worked for Roger Corman will tell you this, you will never make a movie longer than 88 minutes for Roger Corman. And do you know why?
I don't know why.
Well, it'll become quite obvious when I tell you. 88 minutes. If you're going to ship a 35 millimeter film print of a movie, you're never going to put more than 22 minutes on a reel, and therefore, they did not make a can that would hold more than 4 reels. And Roger absolutely refused to ever have a movie that would not fit in a single can. That was the logic. And I'm telling you, anybody who knows anybody who's ever been a director or producer for Roger Corman, ask them, did you ever make a film that was 89 minutes for Roger? And I guarantee you, they never did. I'd be shocked to hear about it. So we made the movie 85 minutes, and Roger was thrilled about that. And we delivered it. And then Roger calls one day and says, "Well, Ron, I don't do a great Roger, but we need to prepare it for television." I said, "Oh," and he says, "Yes, it needs to be 95 minutes. "Oh, okay, well, where are we going to come up with that extra time?" well, I have some ideas for you. Can you get it? Can you get it to 93? Can you get it to 89 minutes or something like that? I said, yeah, I think we can. And then he says, okay. He says, just go to the outtakes. Now, of course, anybody who cares about the movie they're making, and of course, even a movie like Sorority House Massacre, it's your first film that you're producing, you still care about it, okay? All right, we put all the effort and all the sleepless nights into making a movie for Roger Corman, and he says, well, just like go to your outtakes, or go to the extensions of the scenes and add whatever you can in. So we were able to add like 2 extra minutes by adding 5 frames here and 10 frames there, and just extending the shots. It's not so artfully edited, but okay. And then he says, well, go shoot some extra footage. So like some extra scenes? He says, yeah, like just insert some extra scenes in there. And like, oh, goodness gracious. Any good movie should not have any room for any extra scenes. There should never be. So I remember one of the scenes, I think it was the major scene that we had to add in there, was we had a moment before a sorority sister walks into the house, and from when they left school. And so we thought, okay, well, so we have to get these 2 young women together, and this young guy, the young guy who was in the scene, and we're literally filming that, the director, myself, the cinematographer, and that's it, me with the microphone, and so we film it, and well, we go to film it, we contact the actresses, and one of them goes, oh gosh, we should call last week. I said, why? She said, why, I really cut my hair. I said, oh, okay, well, all right, we'll make that work, So of course we didn't have money for hair extensions or anything like that, or a wig. So the script got written around the fact that hair can be quite so funny. One day it looks this way and one day it looks that way. So that's what the discussion was outside of the house before the young woman walks in, and so we delivered all that to Roger, and he goes, okay, and so how are you going to get it to the length you need? And he said, oh, don't worry, I'll just slow it down by 10%.
Oh, wow. Oh,
like,
wow.
Okay.
The whole movie was slowed down by 10%? Wow. So is everybody talking in a slurry way?
Maybe it was 5%, but he says, nobody will notice it. Nobody will notice it.
That's amazing. That's
So
amazing.
That's my experience. I loved working with him. He would give us notes. He literally, can you just remove 1 frame off this scene at the end of it, the shot where she goes here? He was very specific about all of his edits, and it was just such a great experience. It was trying. We had to rent his camera gear, which damaged the film, and he went, oh, nobody will notice the claw mark in the middle of the frame. And we had to rent camera on our own because he wouldn't let us rent from anybody else but him.
Well, he's sort of his own little cottage industry.
I have such respect for him as an entrepreneur. Not necessarily how I want to make movies, but.
By the way, in a sort of related but sidebar thought, do you know, allegedly, I'm pretty sure it's the actual reason why movies, because when they first started making movies in Hollywood, they would make short reels. They would make, 10-minute reels or less. And then eventually somebody said, well, we need to extend these and make longer stories. Do you know how they arrived at most movies on average being around 120 minutes?
I have no idea. Do you?
I do.
How's that?
So that's about the average length of the human bladder to withstand.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've heard that.
So people just they started, if they started making 3-hour movies, that's why they would put intermissions in the middle of Gone with the Wind and Lawrence of Arabia, because they were 3 and 4 hours long. And so most movies wind up being 100 to 120 minutes, and that's a feature length. And it has to do with the human bladder. Okay, last question. Do you have a solid piece of tip or a bit of advice for those who are trying to break into the business, or maybe somebody who's in and trying to get to that next level?
Well, because I care so much about aesthetic and storytelling, I would say they definitely should watch the animation shows because I
Okay.
think that they will become better filmmakers as a result of it. There's so many things. I say take an animation class to understand the medium, because until you deal with film on a frame-by-frame basis, it's hard to understand the importance of every single frame.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, you learn a lot about the history of animation, whether you're pursuing live filmmaking or not. You know, they could not shoot My Dinner with Andre today without a visual effects supervisor. You know, which is a film that was shot entirely over, it's almost a 2-hour movie of two men sitting and talking for 2 solid hours. And of course, there's no visual effects supervisor in that. But nowadays, because visual effects are so crucial to the process, I think having some experience in the animation space, practical, literally basic class that you could take at a community college. And I also think it's really wise that when you meet people to have a notebook, literally a physical paper notebook. Don't ever put stuff in your phone. You'll forget it and lose it and not look for it. Write it down because you'll remember it more readily, and then you can put it in your phone later on.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just some things I tell students all the time.
I think those are both very wise. And you know, I tell students all the time very similar things. You should always have something to record on. I do tell them you can use your phone, but I think you're right. I do think that there's something that happens in the physical process from the brain through the arm with a pen or pencil, and you're writing, and that locks it into your brain a lot better than just typing it into a computer or saying it into a recorder.
I do a lot of lecturing at colleges and universities, and I was at the university last year, and I told the students, I said, you know, don't type on your phones. Don't type on I always start my introduction. I'm Ron Diamond. I'm an animation producer. I'm from Los Angeles, yada, yada, yada. And so, so I do that introduction, and then I say, please, if you've got a pad of paper, get it out. I really want you to write stuff down. Ask a friend to loan you a pen and paper if you don't have it. And this one student absolutely was not going to have it. He says, I'm going to put it in my phone. I said, no, really, you got to put it in. He was like, no, I've got everything in my phone. I said, all right, I just have one question for you. I said, what's my name?
No idea.
No idea.
No idea.
I said, if you're really taking notes, you'd know.
Yeah,
you would have answered that.
And it would have been right in front of him too. Even if he did forget, it'd be right in front of him.
It would be right in front of him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, this has just been a fantastic, well more than an hour at this point, just a terrific interview with so much great information. And I'm so grateful for you coming on StoryBeat today. It's fantastic stuff. And anybody that is interested in animation should really pay attention to this and anything that you have to say.
Yeah, and maybe you can post our website.
Oh, absolutely.
animationshowshows.com.
Anybody that's looking for AWN and so on, it'll be right there. We'll have all that. The animation shows, it'll all be on the website. Thank you so much again for being on the show.
Truly a pleasure. Thanks, Steve. Real fun being with you today.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.